Hello, welcome back to nuk234, Immersive VR Compositing in Nuke. This is class number 4, and I am your professor, Daniel Smith, and this week we are focusing on the forest set, and we're going to be getting our environment ready for rendering. So what we need to do is we're going to be starting out with an IBL style background. Now we're not going to be using the photographic dome per se for true image-based lighting, but we're going to be using it to fill out all the details that aren't truly 3D, and it'll fill in the space beyond what we have three-dimensionally. And we're also going to be designing that projection dome that's going to go on. We're going to set that up in Nuke, and we're going to use that primarily. We'll have it both in Maya, but we're also going to bring it into Nuke to render it there. And then we're going to set up some textures for the ground and bring in higher res trees and get it all set up so it's looking beautiful. And then we're going to test and prototype all our renders using a very fast method, using Hardware 2.0, which I've been using in the previous classes, but that way we can get those things rendered very quickly and get those frames back into Nuke and set up our slap comp. This will prepare our Nuke script to ingest the final renders where we'll be able to really tweak and finish that off. So let's get started. All right, so we're here inside of Maya, and we're in our previs file, and we're going to have to do a couple little things here. And first of all, I'm going to hide some of this material. And that's probably too much material. Let's back that up a little bit. Let's manually select those two walls and hit the H key and hide. And I want to get rid of the track. And we also need to hide the visibility on our motion base. We're still going to need our camera, so I'm going to select the base itself and go to the attribute editor, object display, and turn off visibility there. And that's good enough. And the other thing is, what we're basically going to do here is we're going to make a new forest over here. Now, these trees are kind of low res proxies, and I had my modeler model a higher res version of that, and my modeler who did the trees and the troll and did the textures for it is Hope Bracken, and she did a really great job, and I just want to thank her. And I'm going to take the box here, and I want to get rid of it right now because this is great for our pre-visualization, but we've got a harsh corner right here. And when we look through, we've got our lines of perspective hitting a line there. So what we really want is a dome, or at least a hemispherical projection that's going to fill out some of the details. And it's a little too close, so I think we're going to push our trees back a little way, and we're also going to sculpt some new ground and such. So let's go back to perspective view, and I'm going to take the room right now and I'm going to hide it. We're going to keep it in our file, but we're not going to get rid of it. Now let's create our dome, and that's going to define the space that we're going to create the ground for. So let's go to our polygon menu and create a new sphere, and we'll just kind of drag it out on the grid there. And let's go over to our inputs and put our radius to about 180, and let's zero it out on X and put the translate to about 53 units. Now, the reason I chose that is it has a good coverage. Now, we can't really see that, so I'm going to do the turning it inside out because we don't need to see it from this point of view. So let's see. We want render stats, and we This is not going to cast or receive shadows. But let's turn it not double-sided, and let's flip the normals inside out. Now you can see how it's killing the lighting, right? So we're going to not have it be visible or receive shadows. So you can kind of see how it's giving us a little bit more room around here. And I want to increase its subdivisions as well. So let's give it a little bit more. Let's see. Let's double it up at least right there. Okay. A little bit more subdivisions. Now at this point, I also want to delete some of this stuff. So let's go ahead and do our polyfaces. And let's just get rid of the whole bottom of the sphere like that. And now we also need to get rid of anything that's in front of the screen. So let's just select all of these and just start deleting these away. We don't really need much of that. Now, what's going to define what we do need and what we don't need? Well, what we're going to do is we're going to put our, well, you know what we'll do is we'll take a first look through the shot cam and we'll check it out. Now, let's put something on this screen that is a little bit more different color than the black. So that way, let's pull up our hypershade and we'll create a new surface shader. And this will be our dome. And we'll make it a little bit of a contrasting color. So let's just make it green screen color for right now. And that's just really arbitrary. It's just so I can see where see how the top of this, I can still see that. This screen mask is really important because it's going to be preventing the render engine from rendering certain areas of the frame. So like way back here, we want it to exclude and include certain areas. So we want to make sure that the screen is tall enough as well as wide enough in certain areas to accommodate that. So let's go back to our perspective. And we're going to go to top view. And let's select our screen mask right here. And we're going to go back into component mode, but this time not on faces, but on points. And let's grab this point right here and drag it so it's much, much wider than our dome, but keep that same kind of vector for the side. And let's do the same for the other side like that. So you see it's far beyond our dome. And now let's go back and look from the shot cam perspective. You see that has now included quite a bit more of that area. And now I want to do the same thing for the top and bottom. So let's switch our views and grab the points on the bottom, and we'll just drag it all the way down. Now make sure that you get all the points, obviously. Wonder why I can't get that one point there. Let's switch our perspective and see why we can't get that guy. There we go. And we'll just drag that down. All right. And now we're going to do the same thing for the top. We could drag it really, really far, but I like to kind of like keep it within reason. So we're going to find a frame in which so this way where we're dragging it to just covers the top of the dome. Now these are extra polygons that we're going to get rid of in a second. So let's return to our sphere. We'll call this our dome underscore 270 because it's basically a 270 degree dome. And we're going to go back to our face mode. And we're going to go into perspective and just kind of like pick these polys right here along these edges and get rid of these because we don't need these. All right. So delete. We don't want any of this material sticking through our dome. And delete. And let's do the same thing over here. And we can probably be a little bit more aggressive because none of these polys that are sticking out back here are going to be seen. So you can have a weird edge, or you can go ahead and make it like quote unquote perfect. I like to leave it like that because it's not going to be rendered from any point of view where you'd be able to see that. So now we've got our dome and we can see that that green dome completely fills our screen throughout the shot and our mask completely blocks it. Now, once we get our new trees in there, we're going to have to do some tree trimming. We're going to have to cut those out as well. But let's go and we're going to jump out of Maya and we're going to stitch together a image to go project onto this. So now we're in a program called AutoPano, and this is made by Color. Color is now owned by GoPro, and you may have seen this stitching software used in some of the other VR classes. It's really good stitching software. I've had it for a couple of years, and it's really great. In today's downloads, you're going to find a Pano folder. If you go into the Pano folder, you're going to find these images inside here. And there are several different images, and what I've included is 8 images that create a 360 degree panorama. And that would be this ground image all the way to this one right here. Now this ground image right here was made from these 3 images here, which is I took 2 shots at 180 degrees to each other on my tripod, and then I took a free held picture of the ground so that way I could paint the tripod out manually in Photoshop. And I'm not getting into that today on how that was done, but if anybody wants to know more, I'll be glad to answer those in the forums. So I'm going to open this up, all these images, and we're going to multi-select these images and we're going to define some information for them. And that information is what kind of camera was it shot with. Mine is a Canon Rebel T3i, so it has a certain conversion factor. And I use a 8mm fisheye lens. Whoops, let's do that again. An 8mm fisheye lens, which, because this is not a full frame sensor and it scales, it's the equivalent of a 12mm. But it's also a fisheye. So make sure we switch this to fisheye. And when you shoot on a proper 360 rig and define everything correctly, the stitching is almost purely automatic. It just flows and it works perfectly. Because by doing 6 pictures instead of 4, even though I have a very wide angle lens, it gives enough overlap to stitch almost flawlessly. So you can see it created a really good initial result here, and this right here is pretty much a very low dynamic range image. They're JPEGs, so I pretty much keep it in LDR mode, and I might adjust the gamma a little bit to give it a little bit more darkness, and it looks real good. So we're just going to hit render. Okay, so I'm going to batch render this out, and that stitching results in a image which I also included in the download. So let's bring that in. So let's grab a 2D texture, and we're going to go into our images, and right here, trees Pano 8-bit. select open, and connect it to the out color. All right, so that's going to replace our green with the actual image that we see, which now we can see that that's going to add a lot of tree imagery back there. So we're going to go ahead and proceed to our next step, which is we've got our tree dome set up, but now we need to create more land right here. So I'm going to take the forest right here and I'm going to hide it away. And let's hide our troll as well for right now, our troll animation, our little previs. And we're going to go to the top view and I'm going to create a new ground plane right here. Now, this could be a little bit bigger, but the general idea is that we're going to subdivide this quite considerably. So let's do like 100 by 80 subdivisions. And this is our new ground plane. And it's okay if it pokes out beyond these areas. We may have to sculpt inward a little bit this way and that way, but the most important thing is that it doesn't come through the screen. So that being said, I'm going to go into sculpting and we're going to sculpt this mesh. So with that in mind, I can pull and push this so it just goes beyond our screen mesh. We want to make sure that nothing comes out of there. And we can just kind of nudge that in. It's also a good idea to like pull some of this stuff outward, and you're going to see that as we do some of this stuff, it's going to change some of the topology. In fact, it might be a good idea to use wireframe shaded so you can kind of see how distorted my topology is right now. So I'm going to hit undo on that, and I'm going to make my brush size quite a bit bigger. So hold on the B key and pull it out. So that way when I pull this, see how the topology is a little bit better, and it's going to look much better when we start to put the textures on there. So again, let's just kind of make sure that our ground, it doesn't have to go all the way to the edge. It just has to make sure that you don't have any gaps visually when we look through our screen hole right here. And we can kind of see that we've got a couple little areas there. So let's just nudge that back and nudge that back a little bit. Now we can do some other things with this. So let's reduce our brush size, and we're going to actually do some elevation changes here. So this is causing some hills, so we can start painting up some hills and stuff like that, and what's really important is that we have hills at the edges, which is going to hide that transition, so we can hide anything low and the seam around here. We want to make it feel like, you know, it's the forest, it's kind of lumpy bumpy, things like that. There's also a great mode in here to create a little textural detail with these little stamps, and we can pull those up and add much more variation in the lumps and stuff like that. So we can get that going quite a bit. Now I'm going to go ahead and pause the video and finish this out, so that way you don't have to sit here and watch me sculpt. Okay, so let's turn our wireframe shading back off, and we're going to hide that. And you can see what I finished off with is, it's pretty lumpy bumpy. There's a flat spot for where our troll is going to go, and I trimmed up some extra polygons that were going beyond. Now, we didn't have to do that. I'm going to hit the subdivision surface preview so we can see what the ground looks like. So, pretty happy with that. And at this point, what we need to do is we need to unhide our forest. And I'm going to take the old forest and I'm going to delete that mesh. And what I want to do at this point is substitute the old trees for the new trees. And this is just a lot of manual process. So what I'll end up doing is just duplicating and importing the new trees and duplicating and rearranging them and spreading them out. So I'm going to go ahead and import my textured trees. And let's see. Where we go? There we go. Dead tree. Okay, so where are you? There he is. Okay, so this new tree is basically the same tree as this one, except it's retopologized and has proper UVs. So that way we can have a beautifully textured object. And so I'm going to basically scale these, rotate them, and move them into position throughout the shot. So that way, I really like the layout that I did in previs for these trees, such that I don't want to not have the same sort of dynamic. And I also purposely left all this space back here so that way we can add more trees, another layer to fill out everything else. So I'm going to go ahead and jump ahead with all of this stuff arranged. Okay, so you can see I've got the trees all arranged, and I've added a couple more trees back here. I also have a couple more of these little guys right here, and I threw a little procedural texture on that. And you can see how the forest is kind of shaping up here. And this is really awesome because it's going to work really well. So let's take a look through the shot cam, and we can see how this is distorting and how the 2D image that I shot on location really augments everything else. Now let's put our screen mask back in view so we can see it. And this way we can flip through, and you can see how the forest has really gotten deeper and deeper. Now, if we want to, we could put a couple more dimensional trees back there, no problem. But I'm pretty happy right now with the way it looks. Now, there is this weird shading thing that's happening, but that's part of Viewport 2.0, and that'll never show up in our renders. Cool. So let's work on our texture for the ground. And I want to show you this, because this is a really cool technique. So I'm going to zoom in on the ground here. And what we're going to do is we're going to create a new shading system for this. Now, let's pull up our Hypershade, and we're going to create a couple of images here, or I should say a couple of files. And let's pull this down here like that. And I've got I've got two images primarily that I need to pull in. And what I want you to do is I want you to go to the folder called ground text. And inside ground text, I've got an image called Mossy, which we're going to use for moss. And I've got another image called rock dirt. All right. And rock dirt also has a specular and a normal map. And we're going to put this onto our ground. Now, first of all, I want to create a surface shader. Well, not a surface shader, but we're going to do a Fong E for our rocks. Okay, so let's pull this down over here. I'm going to just shove that up out of the way. And let's put our out color over to the color on this. And we're going to connect it to our geometry. So let's select that. And then right click, assign material to viewport. There we go. All right, so one thing about this is we need to adjust our 2D texture placement node. So I'm going to select the node right here, and we're going to change the amount of times that it repeats. So we're going to make it like a 5 by 5. Now this is a seamless tile, and that gives it a pretty decent distribution of this rocks and dirt around the ground here. And let's do a couple little tweaks to our Phong shader, because right now it doesn't need to be very reflective, and we can reduce some of the specular that's happening on this. Now we're going to break up our specular with a specular map and some bump mapping with a normal map. But you know what? Let's bring in that normal map right now. So we're going to create another 2D texture. Where'd he go? There he is. Okay. And this is going to be a normal map. So let's select that. And this is going to go into our bump mapping. So middle mouse, drag and drop that on there, and it's going to create a bump node right there. And that with that bump node, we want to switch it to tangent space normals. And you're going to see some really ugly stuff in the viewport, but what we're going to do is we're going to reduce that to 0.2. And it's going to look a little bit better. Now it'll render better than it's displaying here. Now also, this is not the same tiling. So if we remember, up here we did 5 by 5, and down here it's now 1 by 1. Now I could manually just make the numbers match, but a better way to do this would be to replace the UV chord with this one's UV chord. So that way they both funnel off of this one right here. There we go. So you see now both maps are tiled the same way, and that adds a little bit more realism to the rocks and gives them a little glisten. Now the really cool thing is I want to put moss on here, and I want to have moss on the little valleys and things like that. And how we're going to do that is we're going to create a layered shader. So we're going to create a layered shader, but before we create that layered shader, we're going to use a 3D texture right here called snow. So let's bring in the snow, and this snow, let's put a Lambert shader down. Let's say there he is. Okay. And we're just going to use this snow to set things up first of all. So put the out color to the color. Okay. So I'm going to put this onto the ground right now, and I want you to see how it works. So this snow shader, basically allows us to have two different things. So right now it happens to be red and white, and this threshold dictates how much stuff is being used, and depth decay is the transition from the red to the white. So when we have it very high or very soft, it dictates that transition zone. So I'm going to put this to 31, which gives us a much higher threshold where we get this very sudden drop off. Now thickness is the actual thickness of that snow. And as we move the threshold around, you can kind of see how it's populating certain areas with that red. We're going to not use this as a color texture, but a ramp that's going to basically determine the transparency of where moss is and where rocks are. So because of that, we're going to make the snow black. We're going to make the surface white. So that basically turns this into an opacity map that's going to dictate how that looks. All right, so let's go back to our hypershade, and we're going to put our a new shader in here, which is called the layered shader. So a layered shader allows us to combine multiple shaders. So what we're going to do here is we're going to have one type of shader, which we're going to use the Lambert shader for the moss. So I'm going to replace that, and now this is our moss, right? And if we drag this over, oh, it's already on there. Okay, we are going to have to change our 2D placement node on our texture down there, and we're going to make this a 5 and a 15 on the repeat, so the moss looks a little bit more moss-like and not so stretchy. Okay, so we're going to go over to our layered shader now, and now we're going to take the first shader, which is the Moss Lambert, and we'll put this up here, and let's actually name that, mossy. All right, and we'll go down here and we'll call this one rock. All right, so that way in the layered shader it actually says mossy or rock, and then middle mouse click and drag that there. So you see it says moss and rock. So delete the green one, and then we're going to take this layered shader and we're going to assign that to our geometry over here. Now it doesn't look much different, as you can tell, but if we move the order of the two swatches, let's bring this over here. If I move the order of this, now rock will be on top, moss is underneath. So I want the moss on top of the rock, right? So we've got moss on top of rock, but on the moss, now we have color, we have transparency, and that's where the snow shader comes into play. So let's go back and find our snow shader, which is now black and white, and we're going to connect this to the transparency, and we're going to put the compositing flag down to layer texture. And what this does now is exactly what we want, which is we've got rocks and we've got moss, and we've got a Phong shader over here for the rocks with normal maps and bump mapping. And then we have up here, we have this Lambert for the moss, and it has two different textural feels to it in one shader, and it looks much more dynamic and much more cool. So let's take a look through our shot cam and see how this is going to look. Let's enable our screen mask. And there we go. So there's our forest. I'm going to tweak some of the lighting, and I'm going to start setting up render layers, but so we can prototype this and make sure that our layers are working, we're going to first render this out as hardware. So that way it's going to look the same as what we're getting out of Viewport 2.0 right here, which is really good. This is a really great improvement in Maya 2016. So what we need to do is we need to come over to our channel box layer editor and go to our render layers. And I'm going to turn off the master layer, and we're going to basically create like 4 basic layers. The first one is the sky dome. So select your dome and go over here and select the layer creation of that layer with that object. Now, we could render the sky dome like that, or we could include the screen mask. So I could right click that, add selected object, and now we have that as a individual layer. And when this renders through hardware, we're going to get a proper masking of this, provided that we remembered to set this up correctly. So I'm going to go back into our shader hypergraph and make sure that our screen mask is set correctly. So let's bring that up, and you can see that nope, it's not. It's not even a surface shader. So we want that to be a surface shader. So create a new surface shader and select it and assign material to there. And we're going to rename this screen mask master. And I want you to take the matte opacity and take it all the way to black. So this is 00000 all the way down the line. Now this is important because when we go to render this, we want it to actually render so that screen mask creates an alpha channel. So when we look through here, it's, well, guess we're not going to get an alpha channel out of hardware, but through mental ray, it should subtract away from that. And that's the important part, is we want it to make sure that it acts as a alpha. See how that's cut out and we only see the screen, and this is black in both alpha and black in there. So that's correct. So in that case, I'm going to have to add one extra pass to make sure that we have an alpha of the screen itself. So this is good for this layer, and let's rename this as our dome. Okay, and well, let's see, sky dome. Okay, so good. So we've got sky dome, and now our next render layer is going to be the trees. Of course, we need the trees. So let's select our lights, because lights will be an important part of that, and our forest, and our screen mask. And then come over here, hit this button. That's going to create a new layer with those selected objects. Jump up here. Trees. So now we've got sky dome, we've got trees. All right. And let's give that a test render with my hardware. Sweet. And let's see what we have in our alpha. Perfect. So we do have alpha of the trees. Excellent. And let's see make sure this is rendering. Yeah, it's rendering from a perspective. Let's render it from the shot cam. There we go. Awesome. Okay. So we got that working. So now next is our troll layer. We want to put our troll in here. So let's just grab him. So we're going to do just a troll all by himself, because, well, he's kind of getting cut off by the mat, whatever. But let's just select our troll animation. There we go. And where is he? Oh yeah, he's hidden. So let's unhide him. There we go. And he fights us and beats us up. We also need to add the lights. Forgot about that. So let's add our lights. Right click, add selected. There we go. And troll. Give it a test. We have alpha. Perfect. Okay. And let's break out one more layer. And that layer is going to be a screen layer, because we need that to basically have an alpha channel if we need to pre-multiply certain things. So that's going to be our curved screen here. So let's put that into a new layer. Call that screen and unhide that. And we're going to render this one. All right. So this is going to give us an alpha of that area if we need it for the Sky Dome or anything else along the way. All right. So we basically have our primary hardware setup layers. They're really simple right now. There's going to be a lot more complexity in the layers and other additional passes that will be coming with the full render, but this way we can at least do our slap comp. So save this out, and you're going to then send this to batch render, and batch render will render each one of these. I find it handy if you go into the render settings and actually right click in the file name prefix and insert the name render layer. And you see what that's going to do is it's now going to name each render layer whatever it's named here, Sky Dome, Tree, Trolls, and Screen, and dump them into the directory. If you do a slash and put render layer in there again, that's going to automatically create a directory called screen and then put the images screen.png in there. So render layer / render layer. And you can see there's other things that you can actually put into the various names, such as passes, types, extensions, the date, yada, yada, yada. Pretty cool. I included in downloads only a single frame of this, frame 200, because it was a huge amount of data, and these render really fast. The thing about hardware is it's all dependent on your video card. Most of these renders took me about anywhere from like 5 to 10 minutes, and that would actually probably take longer to download than it will be to render. So I only included the one frame. So you'll have to do the batch render to render these out. If you run into any problems, hit me up in the forums. I had one little problem because I didn't have enough RAM in my machine to do the tree layer. So what I had to do was turn off all the other layers but the trees, go into the trees, and do a play blast. And the way you do a play blast for this is twofold. First of all, we want to get rid of overscan. So select your camera and go down to display options and turn off your overscan, which is, see, it's set to 1.2. Just turn it to 1. So that way the resolution gate is identical to what you're going to play blast. And then go up to Windows and do a play blast like this. Do the options, and you want to use the time slider. You want to check off render off screen. By rendering off screen, it'll go faster and it will do better job at it. And it's less likely to crash. You want to switch from QuickTime or AVI to image. Do a PNG. Take from your display. You don't want, it's by default it says from window. You want to say from render settings, so that way it does the 4K image. And then browse to where you want it to save, and then hit play blast. And what that's going to do is it will off screen, it will generate 400 frames in about 4 to 5 minutes, which is what I had to do to get this particular pass done. The other passes worked fine, but this pass takes, because of all the textures and the geometry, it took up too much memory to be able to do it with regular hardware. All right, so we are finally over here in Nuke, and what I want you to do is I want you to open up all the renders that you just blasted out of there. So let's grab, first of all, I'm going to grab the image dome and our screen render and our sky dome, trees, and our troll. All right, so we have our troll, have our trees, we have our sky dome, we have our screen all rendered out. Now, I also recommended that you bring this in because what we're going to do with this is we're actually going to, if you don't necessarily have to render this out of hardware, and there's another way that we can do it inside a Nuke, and I thought we'd show you that as well. So what we need to do now is just set up our slap comps, and I had you open up last week's composite script, and we're going to build on that. And we're going to just kind of throw this over here. And first thing we're going to do is bring in a piece of geometry of our sky dome. Now we can export that out of Maya as an OBJ. And there it is, our dome 270. So I've got that, and now we have that right there. Now, this is another thing where, you know, because this is a surface shader and it's basically apples for apples, it's exactly what it is, pixel for pixel. You know, I'm going to put this in here through this because that way I can do some color correction on the original image and maybe even do some stuff like take that sun out, make the sun a little bit more directional to what the comp needs to be. There's some areas that if we see like this roadway, we might want to get rid of it, or this little sign from the park that I didn't get to take out. So that way it becomes more fluid and dynamic, and I don't have to go back to Maya to re-render. But we could use that, but let's double check it and make sure that it works. Now, over here we have our setups. So we already have our screen object, so let's move that over to this area and make a copy. And we also have our actual shot cam. So I'm going to create a dot node and pipe this over here, so that way we can also include this into our setup. So I'm going to set up a scanline render. There's our camera. Here's our object. And this is going to render this pass out right here. Now let's double check and see if this is working correctly, and kind of overlay it straight together with this other piece. And let's do a little wipe back and forth. So we've got our version here, got our version here, and all right, so you can see that it does line up. Let's get a little more screen real estate up there. Okay, but Nuke might have a little bit better filtering on that. At least we can control it a little better. So you can kind of see how that's working. So I'm going to bring this one out. And next up is to take the trees, and we're going to merge that on top of the result of our scan line. All right. Now we've got a little bit of an issue right there, in which because that was a play blast and not a hardware, it included the gray of of our background inside of Maya, and not going straight to black. So, but there is a fairly clean alpha. So what we can do is we can pre-multiply this. So we can create a pre-mult, drop it in there like that, and that should give us a nice clean output to the background. Now you can see a lot of this covers up everything up there. We've got some crap down here, but I'm not going to worry about it. And then we have our merge right here of our troll. We'll put our troll back in through there. All right, there we go. And we can scrub through our shot and we can see how it's working still. And this was a in case of I need, which I might do up here because I've got, we do have this right here, and it's got all these little weird dots down here. We don't really need to worry about that, but the screen is something that we might need to utilize at some point. So we're going to now take our setup and recreate the basic Project 3D onto our screen from the original camera. So let's do that. And go to 3D, get our shot cam, turn that off. All right. And let's view that right there. And we can see it's still lining up nicely. And let's just kind of use our screen plane just real quick to make sure we are still in alignment. I'm going to disable that for now. And we're good. So for right now, let's save this comp out. So for right now, this is where we're at. I want you to get everything, understand all the concepts that I showed you today. And we're going to be rendering out high-res assets for these high-res assets. I'm going to render these out with multiple passes, and we're going to build up the quality of our background considerably in next week's class. And we're going to use a lot of different types of passes and some cool stuff to recreate some depth and fog and stuff like that out of position passes. So till next week, hit me up in the forums if you have any questions, and thank you so much.